Everly Callahan, 32, sat stunned in the mahogany-paneled office as her parents' muffled laughter echoed in her ears. Her grandmother's will had left her exactly $10, while her parents received the estate worth millions. As they exchanged self-satisfied glances, the lawyer cleared his throat. "There's one more item," he said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. To be opened by Everly alone. The moment she broke the seal, everything she thought she knew about her family collapsed around her. "Before I continue with Everly's shocking discovery, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell if you enjoy family revenge dramas where karma comes full circle. Trust me, you'll want to see how Everly turns the tables on those who betrayed her blood ties." Let's dive deeper into this family's dark secrets. Everly had always been the black sheep of the Callahan family, a prestigious name in Boston's social elite. While her parents Richard and Victoria embodied old money perfection with their charity galas and country club memberships, Everly had chosen a different path. After graduating from Harvard with honors in journalism, she'd turned down cushy corporate positions to become an investigative reporter focused on exposing corruption. "You're wasting your potential," her father would say during their increasingly rare family dinners. "The Callahan name stands for something in this city." Victoria would inevitably chime in, dabbing her perfectly painted lips with a monogrammed napkin. "Darling, you could be on the board of any foundation you wanted. Instead, you're digging through trash for stories about people who don't matter." What her parents never understood was that Everly's moral compass had been calibrated by her grandmother, Eleanor Callahan. While Richard and Victoria had been busy climbing social ladders, it was Eleanor who'd attended Everly's school plays, who'd taught her that privilege came with responsibility, not entitlement. "Remember," little bird Eleanor would tell her using the nickname that always made Everly feel safe, "true character isn't what you have, but what you give." Eleanor had built the family fortune herself, transforming a small inheritance into a real estate empire, during a time when female entrepreneurs were rare. She'd done it through grit and integrity, values that seemed to have skipped a generation with Richard and Victoria, but found fertile ground in Everly. The relationship between Eleanor and her son Richard had always been strained. He viewed the family wealth as his birthright rather than a privilege. Victoria, who came from new money, had married Richard with calculated precision, fitting herself into Boston society like a missing puzzle piece. Together they lived lavishly off Eleanor's success while contributing little. Everly's relationship with her grandmother had deepened after college, when she moved into the carriage house on Eleanor's estate. Their evening conversations over tea became Everly's anchor amidst the turbulent disapproval from her parents. When Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, it was Everly who drove her to chemotherapy appointments and researched experimental treatments, while Richard and Victoria maintained their social calendar, visiting only when it wouldn't interfere with their engagements. In her final months, Eleanor had grown increasingly reflective. "There are things I should have done differently," she'd told Everly one evening as they watched the sunset from her bedroom window. "Mistakes I made that I can't undo, but I've tried to make things right." Everly had assumed her grandmother was speaking philosophically about life regrets. Now, sitting in the lawyer's office with the mysterious letter in her hands, those words took on new significance. The contents of the will hadn't been entirely surprising. Eleanor had always been traditional about family legacy, and despite their differences, Richard was her only child. The estate going to him followed conventional expectations. What had shocked Everly was the deliberate nature of the $10 inheritance, not an oversight but a specific bequest that felt like a posthumous rejection from the person she'd loved most. The lawyer, Mr. Harrington, had been Eleanor's trusted advisor for decades. His face remained professionally neutral as Richard and Victoria gloated, but Everly noticed a certain tightness around his eyes when they laughed at her paltry inheritance. Now, as she held the sealed letter, she caught a glimpse of something else in his expression. Anticipation. With trembling fingers, Everly broke the seal. The familiar scent of her grandmother's lavender perfume wafted from the heavy stationery. The first line made her breath catch. "My dearest little bird, if you're reading this, then I've set in motion what should have been done long ago." Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled the page with revelations that made Everly's heart pound against her ribs. Phrases jumped out at her. "The truth about your birth documents in the safe, betrayal I can no longer keep silent about." Mr. Harrington watched her intently as the color drained from her face. "Miss Callahan, your grandmother left instructions that after you've read the letter, I should provide you with these." He reached into his briefcase and removed a manila folder and a small brass key. "The key opens a safety deposit box at First Boston Trust. The contents are now legally yours." Richard leaned forward, his celebratory mood suddenly clouded with suspicion. "What's this about, Harrington? What did my mother give her?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "I'm afraid that information is confidential between myself and Miss Everly Callahan." Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. "This is absurd. We're her parents. We have a right to know." Everly looked up from the letter, seeing her parents, really seeing them, perhaps for the first time. The entitled expectation in their eyes, the casual cruelty with which they dismissed her all her life, the shallow materialism that drove their every decision. Eleanor's words burned in her mind, illuminating a lifetime of lies. "Actually," Everly said quietly, "according to this letter, you may not be my parents at all." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face contorted with rage while Victoria went impossibly still, a porcelain mask, with only her rapidly blinking eyes betraying her panic. "What nonsense is this?" Richard finally sputtered. Mother was clearly not in her right mind at the end. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "I can assure you, Mr. Callahan, your mother was of completely sound mind when she prepared these documents. In fact, she was remarkably thorough in her preparations." Everly stood gathering the letter folder and key. A strange calm had settled over her, replacing the hurt and confusion. "I think we're done here," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I have some research to do." As she walked toward the door, Victoria called after her, voice honey sweet but laced with venom. "Everly darling, don't be dramatic. Let's discuss this as a family." Everly turned, fixing her mother with a level gaze. "Family," the word tasted bitter on her tongue. "I'm beginning to think I don't know the meaning of that word. But thanks to Grandma Eleanor, I'm about to find out." The safety deposit box at First Boston Trust contained evidence that detonated Everly's world like a precision bomb. Inside were birth certificates, her original one and an amended version filed when she was 3 months old. DNA test results. Legal documents with signatures she recognized as her parents. And photographs, dozens of them documenting a story Eleanor had kept hidden for over 3 decades. Sitting in her apartment that evening, Everly spread the documents across her dining table, assembling the pieces of a puzzle she'd never known existed. The truth emerged with devastating clarity: she was not Richard and Victoria's biological daughter. According to Eleanor's detailed documentation, Everly had been born to Eleanor's goddaughter Sophia Winters, a talented artist who had worked as Eleanor's personal assistant. Sophia had become pregnant after a brief relationship with a visiting architect from Seattle. When complications arose during childbirth, Sophia had not survived. Her dying wish had been for Eleanor to ensure her baby would be cared for. Eleanor, still grieving the loss of her husband and worried about her son's increasingly materialistic lifestyle, had made a fateful decision. Richard and Victoria, married for 5 years and unable to conceive, had been desperate for a child to complete their perfect social image. Eleanor had offered them a solution: adopt Sophia's baby and in exchange receive a substantial increase in their monthly allowance from the family trust. They had agreed readily, seeing the arrangement as advantageous. A baby would secure their social standing and increase their income. The adoption had been handled quietly through Eleanor's connections, records amended, and Everly Sophia Winters had become Everly Victoria Callahan. What the documents revealed next made Everly's stomach turn. A private investigator's report, dated from when Everly was just 7 years old, detailed Richard and Victoria's neglect. While maintaining a picture-perfect family image for public consumption, they had relegated Everly's actual care to a series of nannies and housekeepers. Eleanor, discovering this, had begun to spend more time with her granddaughter, establishing the deep bond that would sustain them both. There were journal entries from Eleanor documenting her growing regret about the arrangement and her internal struggle over whether to tell Everly the truth. "She deserves to know her mother's story," one entry read, "but I fear losing her if she learns of my complicity in this deception." The final document was a letter from Eleanor's oncologist, dated 6 months before her death, confirming her terminal diagnosis. This appeared to have been the catalyst for her decision to finally reveal the truth. Everly sat back, emotionally exhausted. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly with calls and texts from Richard and Victoria, which she ignored. Instead, she opened her laptop and began what she did best: investigating. By morning, she had located her birth mother's family. The Winters had moved to Portland after Sophia's death, too painful to remain in Boston with the memories. Sophia had a younger sister, Madeline, who was now a professor at Portland State University. According to social media, Madeline had 2 children close to Everly's age. Cousins she had never known existed. The architect, her biological father, had been easier to trace. James Bennett had established a successful firm in Seattle, specializing in sustainable design. He had married and had 1 son, but had divorced 10 years ago. His firm's website featured a photo of a man with Everly's same distinctive hazel eyes and cleft chin, features that had always seemed out of place in the Callahan family photos. As dawn broke over Boston, Everly made 2 decisions. First, she would contact both the Winters family and James Bennett. Second, she would use her investigative skills to understand exactly what her grandmother had set in motion with that $10 inheritance and mysterious letter. The next afternoon, a call from Mr. Harrington provided another piece of the puzzle. "Miss Callahan, I hope you've had time to process the information from yesterday," he said, his voice gentler than his professional demeanor in the office. "I'm working on it," Everly replied, looking at the organizational chart she'd created on her living room wall, connecting people and events across 3 decades. "There's something else you should know. The $10 inheritance mentioned in the will reading was merely procedural, a legal formality to acknowledge you in the document. Your grandmother established a separate trust in your name 5 years ago. As executor, I was instructed to inform you of its existence only after you had received and read her letter." Everly sat down hard on her sofa. "A trust? What kind of trust?" "A substantial one," Mr. Harrington said. "Eleanor transferred approximately 40% of her assets into this trust, which has been appreciating under management. It includes several key properties, including the historical brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue where she maintained her offices." Everly's mind reeled. The Commonwealth Avenue property alone was worth millions. Additionally, Mr. Harrington continued, she left specific instructions regarding the remaining 60% that went to Richard and Victoria. "What instructions?" "The inheritance they received comes with conditions. They must maintain employment contributing to society. Charity board positions don't count. And demonstrate fiscal responsibility. Otherwise, those assets revert to your trust." Eleanor was quite insistent that her fortune not fund their lifestyle indefinitely. Everly laughed despite herself. Her grandmother's strategic mind had been legendary in business circles. Even from beyond the grave, she was orchestrating accountability. "There's more," Mr. Harrington said. "Eleanor left a video message for you. She asked that I only mention it once you'd discovered your birth parents' identities." Would you like to come to the office to view it? I'll be there in an hour, Everly said, already reaching for her coat. The video revealed an Eleanor that few had seen, vulnerable, remorseful, but resolute. Recorded in her final weeks, she looked fragile, but her eyes burned with the same determination that had built her empire. My dearest little bird, she began using the endearment that now carried new significance. If you're watching this, then you know the truth about your remarkable mother Sophia. What you don't yet understand is why I've orchestrated things this way. It wasn't just to right a wrong though, that's part of it. It was to give you something your birth mother valued above all else. The truth. And something I've watched you earn through your own merit freedom. 3 days after the will reading, Everly requested a meeting with Richard and Victoria at Eleanor's mansion. Now technically their property, though they had yet to move in from their Beacon Hill townhouse. Mr. Harrington attended as her legal representative, bringing additional documentation she had requested after reviewing the trust details. The grand living room with its sweeping views of the Charles River had been the setting for countless Callahan family moments. Some genuine, many performative. Victoria entered first, her smile brittle but determined, dressed immaculately, as if for a social luncheon, rather than a family reckoning. Richard followed his face, betraying the strain of the past few days, despite his attempt at nonchalance. Everly darling, Victoria moved as if to embrace her, but Everly stepped back. I think we should sit, she said, gesturing to the arrangement of chairs she'd positioned earlier. Richard's eyes narrowed at the formal setup. Is this really necessary? Whatever misunderstanding has occurred, this isn't a misunderstanding, Everly interrupted. And yes, it's necessary. Once seated, Mr. Harrington opened his briefcase and distributed folders containing summaries of the documents Everly had discovered. She watched as Richard and Victoria leafed through them, their expressions morphing from confusion to alarm. What is this? Richard demanded, waving a paper. Some kind of blackmail attempt. Everly leaned forward. It's the truth. I know everything. About Sophia Winters. About the arrangement with grandmother. About the money you took to raise a child you never actually cared for. Victoria's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck. That's a gross mischaracterization. We gave you everything. The best schools, connections, opportunities. You gave me things, Everly corrected. Status symbols that reflected well on you. But you never gave me what mattered: time, attention, acceptance. Richard slammed the folder down. This is absurd. Mother was clearly manipulating situations from beyond the grave. She always did have a flair for the dramatic. Actually, Mr. Harrington interjected, Mrs. Eleanor Callahan was exceptionally thorough in her documentation. These aren't merely allegations, they're supported by substantial evidence, including your own signed agreements. Everly pulled out the most damning piece of evidence. A contract Richard and Victoria had signed 32 years ago, agreeing to specific terms for Everly's upbringing in exchange for increased financial support. The document included requirements for parental involvement that, based on Eleanor's meticulous records, they had systematically failed to fulfill. You literally agreed to be paid to be my parents, Everly said quietly. And then you outsourced the job anyway, collecting the benefits without doing the work. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You have no idea the sacrifices we made. Do you know what it's like to raise someone else's child? To look at you every day and see a stranger's features. Eleanor forced this arrangement on us. The raw honesty of Victoria's outburst hung in the air. Richard shot his wife a warning glance, but the damage was done. Victoria, he hissed, that's enough. But Everly had heard the truth she'd sensed her entire life. She had never truly been wanted, merely acquired, like another status symbol in their collection. Actually, she said, her journalist's instinct for the perfect follow-up question kicking in. I'd like to hear more about how this arrangement was forced on you. Because the documentation suggests you were quite eager for both the child and the money. Richard attempted damage control. You're taking things out of context. We were young, we wanted a family. Mother had resources and connections. It was a practical solution for everyone, including Sophia Winters. Was it practical for her to die in childbirth without ever knowing what would happen to her daughter? The question landed like a physical blow. Richard had the decency to look away, but Victoria's eyes narrowed calculatingly. What exactly do you want from us, Everly Money? You've clearly learned about the trust. Is this about extracting more, Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. Perhaps this would be an appropriate time to discuss the conditions of your inheritance, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan. For the next 30 minutes he outlined the requirements Eleanor had established. Employment in socially contributive roles, fiscal responsibility benchmarks, community involvement that went beyond photo opportunities. Failure to meet these conditions would result in assets reverting to Everly's trust. As the implications sank, in Richard's face darkened. This is coercion. We'll contest it. You're welcome to try, Mr. Harrington replied calmly. However, Mrs. Eleanor Callahan spent considerable resources ensuring these conditions would withstand legal challenges. Additionally, contesting the will would make certain documents public. Documents I suspect you'd prefer remain private. Victoria, always quicker to assess social dynamics than her husband, placed a restraining hand on Richard's arm. What are your terms, Everly? Surely we can reach a reasonable arrangement. Everly had anticipated this moment, the negotiation, the attempt to maintain control through compromise. It was the Callahan way, after all. But she wasn't a Callahan. Not really. Never had been. I don't have terms, she said. I'm not looking for a deal. I simply wanted you to know that I know. And that Eleanor knew too. That's all? Richard scoffed. That's it, this dramatic setup for what? Moral superiority. You're more like Mother than I thought. Everly stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I've made contact with my biological father and my mother's family. They didn't know I existed. Another detail you neglected to mention all these years. I'm flying to Seattle tomorrow to meet my father, then to Portland to meet my aunt and cousins. Victoria paled. You're going public with this. I'm not taking out a billboard if that's what you're worried about. But I'm not keeping secrets anymore. Not for you, not for anyone. As they prepared to leave, Richard paused at the doorway. For a moment, something like regret flickered across his face. Everly. Regardless of how this all started, you are my daughter. The only child I've ever had. Everly met his gaze steadily. Biology isn't what makes a parent, Richard. Presence does. Love does. And by that measure, I was Eleanor's daughter, far more than I was ever yours. After they left, Everly wandered through the mansion, touching familiar objects, remembering moments with her grandmother. In Eleanor's study, she found a photo she'd never noticed before. Tucked inside a book was a picture of a young woman with Everly's smile painting at an easel by a window. On the back was written Sophia Summer, 1990. I found her, Everly whispered to the empty room. Just like you knew I would. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Bennett, confirming his eagerness to meet her. Another notification showed an email from Madeline Winters, with the subject line, Welcome to the family. For the first time since the will reading, Everly felt something beyond shock and anger. It was possibility, the possibility of a different kind of family, one built on truth rather than appearances. Wow, this story keeps taking more intense turns. If you're still with me, drop a comment about a time when you discovered a family secret that changed how you saw your relatives. Have you ever felt like Everly, finding out that what you thought was true about your family wasn't the whole story? While I get ready to tell you about Everly's journey to meet her biological family, hit that like button if you're enjoying this family drama, and subscribe to catch more stories where karma catches up to those who deserve it. The Seattle skyline emerged through wispy clouds as Everly's plane began its descent. Her grip tightened on the armrest, anxiety and anticipation battling within her. In her carry-on bag was a folder containing the few photos of Sophia Winters. She'd discovered the DNA results confirming James Bennett was her biological father, and a letter she'd written and rewritten a dozen times. But I wasn't sure she'd actually give him. James had suggested meeting at a small cafe overlooking Puget Sound, a neutral location that would give them both space to process the encounter. Everly spotted him immediately upon entering. He stood when he saw her, his familiar hazel eyes widening with recognition. At 63, he was still handsome, his salt and pepper hair adding distinguished gravity to features Everly now recognized from her own mirror. "Everly," he said, her name cautiously as if testing its sound on his tongue. "You look so much like her." They settled into a quiet corner table, ordering coffee that neither seemed particularly interested in drinking. The initial conversation was awkward, full of stops and starts, until James pulled out an old sketchbook. "Sophia gave me this," he explained, opening to pages filled with charcoal drawings. "We only knew each other for 3 months. I was in Boston for a sustainable design project, one of my first big commissions. She was working for Eleanor, cataloging the art collection and managing cultural affairs. The sketches revealed Boston through Sophia's eyes, the public garden in spring, architectural details of historic buildings, and several portraits of a younger James laughing and thoughtful by turns. It was intense between us, but I had to return to Seattle. We planned to try long distance." He turned to a page showing a half-finished sketch of the Charles River. "This was the last thing she drew for me. She mailed it with a letter saying she needed time to figure things out. I never knew she was pregnant." Everly swallowed hard. "You had no idea about me?" James shook his head, eyes glistening. "None. By the time I tried to reconnect, I was told she had died suddenly. No details were provided. I grieved her for years, never knowing." His voice broke. "I had a child. Eleanor's records suggest Richard and Victoria were very motivated to keep everything quiet," Everly said. "I suspect they worried you might interfere with their arrangement." "I would have," James said firmly. "I would have raised you myself." The simple declaration hit Everly with unexpected force. All her life, she'd struggled to feel truly wanted by Richard and Victoria. Here was a man who would have chosen her given the chance. James told her about his life. His architectural practice focused on environmental sustainability, his marriage that had ended amicably, his son Daniel, who was now 30 and working as an environmental engineer. "He's your half-brother," James said. "He's eager to meet you when you're ready." They spent hours talking, filling in 32 years of missing history. James showed her photos of his parents, her grandparents, both now deceased. He shared family medical history she'd never known. When he hesitantly asked about her upbringing, Everly found herself being honest about both the privileges and the emotional neglect. "I'm sorry," he said, reaching across the table but stopping short of touching her hand, respecting her space. "If I had known." "It wasn't all bad," Everly assured him. "Eleanor became my real parent in many ways. She gave me what Richard and Victoria couldn't." By evening they had moved from the cafe to a walk along the waterfront, their conversation flowing more naturally. "I'd like you to meet Daniel tomorrow if you're comfortable with that," James said. "And I'd like to know what happens next. I understand this is overwhelming and I have no expectations, but I'd like to be in your life, Everly, in whatever capacity you're comfortable with." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a man who saw her as an obligation or accessory. "I'd like that too," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. 2 days later, Everly flew to Portland, carrying new memories of laughter with James and Daniel, who had welcomed her with an easy acceptance that made her chest ache with what might have been. Daniel had her eyes too, and they'd discovered a shared love of obscure documentaries and spicy food that had led to a late-night conversation about nature versus nurture and whether taste preferences could be genetic. Madeline Winters lived in a craftsman-style house filled with artwork, much of it Sophia's, preserved by a sister who had never stopped grieving her loss. Unlike James, Madeline had known about the pregnancy, though not about the arrangement with the Callahans. "Sophia was so excited about you," Madeline said, showing Everly a nursery that had been planned. She had already started painting murals on the walls of her apartment. "Birds in flight," she said. Her baby would always look to the horizon. The coincidence of Eleanor's little bird nickname struck Everly like a physical blow. Had her grandmother known about the nursery? Had she chosen that endearment, deliberately a small way of connecting Everly to the mother she never knew? Madeline had 2 daughters, Emma and Lily, both in their late 20s and bearing striking resemblances to the photos of Sophia. Meeting them was like looking at versions of herself with different design choices. The same foundational features assembled with subtle variations. "Mom always told us about Aunt Sophia," Emma explained over dinner at Madeline's house. "We grew up with her art on the walls, her stories. It's like she was a presence in our lives even though she was gone. But we never knew she had a baby." Lily, the younger sister, studied Everly intently. "It's surreal seeing her features on you. Like meeting a ghost, but in the best possible way." Madeline had preserved Sophia's journals, art portfolios, and letters. "These belong to you now," she told Everly, presenting a carefully packed box. "They'll help you know who she was, her voice, her dreams, her heart." That night in the guest room of her aunt's house, Everly opened her mother's journal from the year before her birth. Sophia's handwriting was fluid and artistic, full of observations about life, sketches in the margins, and eventually entries about her relationship with James and her pregnancy. An entry from the 6th month read, "I felt you move today, little one. A flutter like birds' wings inside me. Whatever happens, know that you were created in joy, and that you are fiercely loved already." Everly traced the words with her fingertip, finally connecting with the woman who had given her life. For the first time she allowed herself to cry for all they had both lost. The mother who never got to see her daughter grow, and the daughter who had grown up without knowing her mother's love. Hey everyone, thanks for staying with me through this emotional journey. Before I tell you about how Everly started putting together the pieces of her new identity, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever met someone and felt an instant connection like you'd known them your whole life? Or have you discovered family members later in life? The DNA testing era has created so many stories like Everly's. Drop a comment below, sharing your experience. And if you're enjoying this family revelation story, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life dramas where truth and justice prevail. Back in Boston a week later, Everly's apartment had transformed into an investigative war room. One wall tracked the Callahan family finances based on documents from Eleanor's records and additional research. Another displayed a timeline of her own life with new annotations about Sophia and James, added alongside the events she'd always known. Her dining table was covered with Sophia's journals and artwork, pieces of her biological mother she was slowly absorbing. Mr. Harrington had been surprisingly forthcoming with additional information once Everly explained what she was piecing together. "Your grandmother was playing a very long game," he admitted during a lunch meeting. "She began documenting Richard and Victoria's financial misconduct years ago, but struggled with how to address it without destroying the family completely." "What kind of misconduct?" Everly asked, though she had already uncovered suspicious patterns. The lawyer hesitated, then slid a file across the table. Eleanor suspected they were siphoning funds from her charitable foundation. She could never prove it conclusively, but the evidence was compelling enough that she restructured the foundation's oversight 5 years ago, removing their influence. This aligned with what Everly had discovered in her investigation. Richard and Victoria had maintained a lavish lifestyle despite limited personal income, primarily living off Eleanor's generosity. However, their spending had occasionally spiked beyond even those considerable resources, coinciding with large foundation projects Richard had overseen. Why didn't she confront them? Everly asked. Mr. Harrington looked tired suddenly. She did in her way. But Richard was adept at creating just enough plausible deniability. And she was conflicted. He was her only child despite his flaws. Eventually she decided on a different approach. That approach Everly was learning had been methodical and patient. Eleanor had restructured her assets, created Everly's trust, and documented everything meticulously, all while maintaining family appearances. The $10 inheritance was strategic, Mr. Harrington explained. She knew Richard and Victoria would show their true colors if they thought you had been disinherited. She wanted you to see them clearly without illusions. Everly had seen them clearly all right. In the 2 weeks since the will reading, they had made no attempt to contact her after their confrontation, apparently confident that they had weathered the storm. Public records showed they had already listed their Beacon Hill townhouse for sale, and were planning to move into Eleanor's mansion once the inheritance cleared probate. What they didn't know was that Everly had spent her career following paper trails and uncovering hidden connections. The skills that had exposed corrupt politicians and corporate fraud were now focused on her adoptive parents, and what she found went far beyond Eleanor's suspicions. Through careful analysis of Foundation records she'd accessed through contacts at the Attorney General's office, Everly identified at least 3 instances where significant funds had been diverted through shell companies connected to Richard's college roommate. The money had eventually funded exotic vacations, Victoria's jewelry collection, and even a small yacht that was registered under yet another shell company. More concerning were indications that Richard had used Foundation connections to facilitate questionable real estate deals for associates, potentially crossing into influence peddling. If proven, it could constitute serious violations of nonprofit law. The question was, what to do with this information? Eleanor's video message had offered some guidance. I'm not asking you to punish them, little bird. Punishment rarely leads to growth. I'm asking you to hold them accountable in a way I never could. Use the truth as a tool for transformation, not destruction. Everly sat at her desk, contemplating her grandmother's words, while absently touching the silver locket James had given her before she left Seattle. It contained a miniature portrait of Sophia that he had carried for years. Her phone rang, displaying Daniel's number. Her half-brother had texted regularly since their meeting, but this was his first call. "Hey sis," he said, when she answered, the casual acknowledgement of their relationship still new enough to make her smile. "Dad mentioned you're investigating some financial stuff with the Callahans. That's kind of what I do professionally. Environmental compliance often involves following money trails. Need a second set of eyes." Everly hesitated, then found herself accepting. "Actually, yes. But I need to be clear about my intentions here. This isn't about revenge." Daniel laughed. "No offense, but you barely know me. How would I know if you're vengeful?" "Fair point," Everly admitted. "But grandmother wanted accountability, not destruction. I need to respect that." "Accountability requires consequences," Daniel pointed out. "But I get it. We'll find the balance." Over the next few days, Daniel remotely helped Everly organize her evidence and identify additional connections she had missed. His environmental engineering background gave him unique insight into some of the real estate deals that had environmental variances mysteriously approved despite clear concerns. "This isn't amateur hour," he told her during a video call. "These financial structures were created by professionals. Someone with serious expertise helped set this up." That observation led Everly to Victoria's brother Gregory Campbell, a financial advisor with a reputation for aggressive strategies that occasionally skirted regulatory boundaries. Further investigation revealed his fingerprints on several of the questionable transactions. As the evidence mounted, Everly consulted with an independent forensic accountant, recommended by one of her investigative journalism contacts. After reviewing the documentation, the accountant confirmed what Everly had suspected. there was enough evidence to justify a formal investigation by regulatory authorities. Simultaneously, Everly had been having daily conversations with Madeline and weekly dinners with James, who had flown to Boston to spend time with her. These new relationships were helping her process the seismic shifts in her identity and giving her perspective on what truly mattered to her. Sophia would be so proud of your integrity, Madeline told her during one late-night call. She always said that truth was sacred, but how we use it determines who we are. James offered a different perspective over dinner at her apartment. I understand wanting accountability, but ask yourself, what outcome serves justice without consuming you? I've seen too many people justified in their anger but destroyed by pursuing it. Their insights helped Everly crystallize her approach. This wasn't just about Richard and Victoria facing consequences, though that mattered. It was about honoring Eleanor's legacy, Sophia's memory, and her own values. It was about transforming a family built on lies into something authentic, even if that meant redefining what family meant entirely. By the end of the third week, Everly had formulated a plan that balanced accountability with opportunity for redemption. It would require careful execution, ironclad evidence, and perhaps most challenging, emotional fortitude. But for the first time since reading Eleanor's letter, she felt certain of her path forward. She called Mr. Harrington. I need to schedule another meeting with Richard and Victoria, she said. And this time I'd like representatives from the Foundation's board to attend as well. That's unusual, the lawyer replied, cautiously. May I ask what you're planning? Something grandmother would approve of, Everly said. A chance for truth, consequences, and perhaps even transformation. I see. There was a long pause before he continued. Would next Tuesday at 2 p.m. work? Perfect, Everly said, already mentally rehearsing what she would say. And Mr. Harrington, thank you for helping grandmother protect me all these years. I understand now what a difficult position you were in. The lawyer's voice softened. She loved you very much, Everly, more than anyone. Everything she did was to give you the freedom to become who you were meant to be. As Everly hung up, she looked at the photo of Sophia she'd placed on her desk. I think I'm finally figuring that out, she whispered to the mother she'd never known. Who I was meant to be. I don't know about you all, but I'm on the edge of my seat wondering what Everly's planning. Will she expose Richard and Victoria publicly, or does she have something more strategic in mind? Before I continue with the confrontation you've all been waiting for, I'd love to know what you think justice looks like in this situation. Would you go for public accountability, private consequences, or something completely different? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're as invested in Everly's journey as I am, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update on stories like this, where family secrets finally come to light. The Foundation's conference room felt appropriately formal for what Everly was about to do. Large windows overlooked Boston Harbor, the water reflecting the clear autumn sky. At the mahogany table sat Richard and Victoria, their lawyer beside them, looking tense. Across from them were 3 Foundation board members, respected community leaders who had worked closely with Eleanor for years. Mr. Harrington sat at the head of the table, with Everly positioned at the opposite end. James had offered to attend for moral support, but Everly had decided to handle this alone. This is my inheritance in more ways than one, she'd told him. Grandmother faced difficult truths by herself. I need to do the same. Victoria broke the silence first. I'm not sure why the board needed to be involved in what is clearly a family matter, she said, smiling tightly at the board members. Though of course, we always value your partnership in Eleanor's philanthropic vision. That vision is precisely why we're here, Everly replied, opening the presentation folder in front of her. She distributed copies to everyone at the table. This meeting concerns both family and Foundation matters, as you'll see. For the next 20 minutes, Everly methodically presented the evidence she'd compiled. She walked them through the financial discrepancies, the shell companies, the diverted funds, and the questionable real estate deals. She cited dates, amounts, and connections, presenting everything with the professional detachment she'd cultivated as an investigative journalist. Richard's face darkened progressively as she spoke. Victoria maintained her composure longer, but by the time Everly showed the trail connecting foundation funds to their yacht purchase, her perfectly manicured nails were digging into her palms. The board members looked increasingly disturbed. Patricia Whitmore, who had been Eleanor's closest friend on the board, removed her glasses several times to wipe them, a gesture Everly recognized as her way of processing shock. When Everly finished, Richard slammed his hand on the table. "This is preposterous. You've cobbled together coincidences and created a fictional narrative because you're bitter about your inheritance." "The evidence speaks for itself," Everly replied calmly. "The forensic accountant's analysis is included in your packets, as is the preliminary opinion from the nonprofit law specialist I consulted." Victoria leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet, but eyes sharp. "Darling, if you had concerns, you should have come to us privately. This public spectacle isn't how Callahans handle disagreements." "I'm not a Callahan," Everly reminded her. "Not biologically. And apparently not in values either." Richard and Victoria's lawyer cleared his throat. "While these allegations are serious, they would require substantial investigation to prove. My clients categorically deny any wrongdoing and view this as an unfortunate family disagreement that has escalated unnecessarily." Everly had anticipated this response. "I'm not here to prove criminal charges today, though that remains an option. I'm here to offer a choice." She removed a second folder from her briefcase and placed it on the table. "This contains two possible paths forward. Option 1 is my resignation from the trust Eleanor established for me. I would walk away from everything except the personal items related to my biological mother. Richard and Victoria would retain the full inheritance with modified conditions that I believe are fair." The tension in Richard's shoulders visibly eased, while Victoria's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Option 2, Everly continued, is that I submit all of this evidence to the Attorney General's office, the IRS, and the media simultaneously. I have contacts in all three who are ready to receive the information depending on the outcome of this meeting." Patricia Whitmore found her voice. "And what do you expect of the board in this situation?" "Everly oversight," Everly replied simply. "The choice I'm offering comes with conditions regardless of which option Richard and Victoria select." She turned to her adoptive parents. "If you choose option 1, keeping the inheritance, you must make full financial restitution to the foundation for all diverted funds plus interest. You must resign from all foundation positions and influence. The board will implement new governance procedures I've outlined, including external audits and enhanced transparency measures." Richard's lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but Richard waved him off. "And if we refuse these ridiculous demands, then option 2 automatically activates," Everly said. "The evidence goes public this afternoon. I've prepared everything in advance." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "This is blackmail. Eleanor would never have approved of such tactics." "Actually, Mr. Harrington," interjected Mrs. Callahan, left specific instructions regarding foundation improprieties. She suspected mismanagement but lacked conclusive evidence. She authorized both investigation and, if necessary, legal action as part of her final wishes. Everly hadn't known this detail, and the revelation that Eleanor had anticipated this scenario so completely nearly broke her professional demeanor. "There's one more element," she said, regaining her focus. "Regardless of which option you choose, I've arranged for the Commonwealth Avenue property to be transferred to a new charitable trust dedicated to supporting young artists. It will be named the Sophia Winters Foundation in honor of my biological mother. The carriage house where I lived with grandmother will become a residence for artists who need housing during career transitions or personal hardships." Victoria gasped. You can't just take that property, it's part of our inheritance. Actually, she can, Mr. Harrington confirmed. The property was specifically designated in Eleanor's trust for Everly, with complete discretion as to its use. Richard stared at Everly, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. You've thought of everything, haven't you, just like Mother would have. I learned from her, Everly acknowledged. But I also learned from my mother Sophia through her journals, and from my biological father James, who I've recently met. They all valued integrity above appearances. Something this family could benefit from embracing. Patricia Whitmore spoke up again. For what it's worth, the board fully supports the governance changes Everly has proposed. They align with best practices we should have implemented years ago. Richard and Victoria exchanged glances, a wordless communication honed by decades of marriage. Finally, Richard nodded almost imperceptibly, and Victoria turned to Everly. We'll need time to review the specific terms with our lawyer, she said, stiffly. You have until 5 p.m. today, Everly replied. After that, the evidence goes public. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, Richard lingered, waiting until they were alone. You know, you really are Eleanor's granddaughter, he said, his tone unreadable. Yes, Everly agreed. But I'm also Sophia's daughter and James's daughter. And finally, I'm my own person, making choices based on what I believe is right, not on appearances or advantage. Richard studied her face. I never gave you enough credit. That was my loss. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I did love you in my way. It just wasn't the way you needed. After everyone had gone, Everly remained in the conference room watching boats cross the harbor as the afternoon light softened. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Whatever happened, I'm proud of you. A separate message from Madeline showed a family photo from a recent dinner with the caption, "Your place is waiting whenever you're ready, by 4:30 p.m. Mr. Harrington called to confirm that Richard and Victoria had accepted option 1. They would keep a modified inheritance in exchange for restitution and governance reforms. There would be no public scandal, no legal charges, just private accountability and structural changes to prevent future abuses. As Everly walked home through the Boston Commons, autumn leaves crunching beneath her feet, she felt a weight lifting. The path ahead was clear now. She would divide her time between Boston, Seattle, and Portland, building relationships with her newfound family, while honoring Eleanor's legacy through responsible oversight of her trust. The Sophia Winters Foundation would break ground in the spring, creating opportunities for young artists like her mother. And perhaps most importantly, Everly would continue her investigative journalism with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing firsthand how truth could heal as well as expose. That evening she sat in her apartment surrounded by Sophia's artwork, Eleanor's books, and photographs of her new extended family. For the first time in her life, Everly felt completely authentic. No longer constrained by the expectations of the Callahan name, free to create her own identity from all the threads of her complex heritage. She opened Sophia's journal to an entry from the month before her birth. I hope my child inherits not just my features, but my courage to live truthfully no matter the cost. I'm trying, Mom, Everly whispered. I'm really trying. You guys, this story is almost at its conclusion, and I want to thank you all for staying with me through Everly's journey. Before I share the epilogue, tell me in the comments, do you think Everly made the right choice offering Richard and Victoria a private resolution instead of public exposure? Would you have been as merciful? And have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between justice and mercy? If you've enjoyed this family drama with its satisfying karma ending, please hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about family secrets and justice served. And share this video with someone who appreciates a good redemption arc. 1 year later, Everly stood in the newly renovated gallery of the Sophia Winters Foundation, surrounded by her mother's artwork finally on public display. James and Daniel had flown in for the opening, as had Madeline and her daughters. Even Mr. Harrington attended visibly, moved by how Eleanor's strategic planning had bloomed into something so beautiful. Richard and Victoria had relocated to Florida, maintaining minimal contact, but adhering to all conditions of their agreement. The foundation was thriving under new leadership, its mission stronger than ever. As Everly cut the ribbon, she felt Eleanor and Sophia's presence, two remarkable women united across time by love for the same little bird who had finally found her wings. Life has a way of bringing things full circle, doesn't it? Everly's story reminds us that family isn't just about blood or legal documents, it's about truth, integrity, and genuine care. I'd love to know what resonated most with you about this journey. Did you connect with Everly's search for identity, the way she balanced justice with mercy? Or perhaps how she honored both the grandmother who raised her and the mother she never knew? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel for more powerful family stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that truth and justice can coexist with healing. Thank you for being part of this storytelling experience. I'm grateful for each of you who stayed until the end. Until next time, remember that your story matters too.